Welcome to the Apostolic Podcast. This is your host, Anthony Lindsay. I'm here with Casey Reason, the author of Mirror Images. It's a new book that just dropped, and it takes a comprehensive look at what teacher leadership means today and how teachers can transform the future of their profession. So I had a couple of questions for Casey. All right, first is, you wrote a book on teacher leadership called Mirror Images, and in your book, which is available on Amazon, you include 10 iconic images of teacher leadership roles. Can you detail some of the roles a teacher might play and give us your favorite role?
Sure. Well, first of all, the idea that teachers have control of their destiny and can really manifest their own teacher leadership role is a concept that I have delighted sharing with audiences. And it sounds like it's one of those things that as you share with audiences, some of them may say, well, that seems pretty obvious. You can choose your destiny or your direction. But honestly, most of the teachers I have worked with over the years have found that to be kind of a refreshing perspective and one they hadn't thought of. Because in an era where there's so much where you have to teach to standard, where you're expected to reach certain outcomes, the idea that a teacher can be sort of follow the journey that means a lot to them is something that's truly unique. Now, the reason I presented those 10 images and those 10 sort of iconic teacher leadership archetypes is because I believe right now every teacher is working to some degree as a teacher leader, and that they are occupying a unique space. And in some cases, I think that they can operationalize a more defined journey. So, for example, one of the teacher leadership archetypes is called a method master. And method masters are those teacher leaders that truly hang their hats on. They're the methodology specialists. They understand learning, they understand teaching, they understand pedagogy, and they really are defined as leaders in their profession, leaders in their building and beyond, as those that really understand the methodologies that really drive innovation in our profession. That is a great teacher leadership archetype. My favorite, I actually have two that are my favorites, probably co-favorites that I talk about early in the book. One is called the learning advocate, and the other is the believer. Now, the reason I like those so much, because I think it gets at the most important part of being a teacher leader, which is your heart. Mm-hmm. And the learning advocate, for example, gets at the notion that this person ultimately is a learning cheerleader. And cheerleader is probably the wrong phrase. I don't think I use that in the book, but learning advocate is they advocate for learning. They advocate for learning for teachers. They advocate for learning for students. They advocate for reform models like professional learning communities, because they know that learning needs to be at the center of what they do. And then, of course, the believer is somebody that is a teacher leader who spends a huge amount of their time really infusing belief in others. It's that heart. It's it's bringing the heart to the head skills. We need the head skills, obviously, to do what we do, but the believer absolutely drives home the notion that we have to have heart. We have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe in each other. We have to believe in the profession, and we have to believe, most importantly, in the students we serve and the outcomes we know we can achieve. So the believer and the learning advocate are two of my favorites because of their ability to really demonstrate, which I think is at the heart and at the center of what it means to be a teacher leader. But indeed, as I wrap up this part of it here, it would say that really encouraging teachers to understand that they can own their journey. They actually can adopt a teacher leadership archetype that can inspire them and can inspire their journey in leadership in the profession.
See, I really like the idea in your book how you talk about there are specific archetypes. So there's like almost a platform or a model that you can essentially model yourself after, where you are the believer, you are the learning advocate, where you don't necessarily have to be in one particular mold, but hey, here are the greatest roles, the greatest archetypes for a teacher or a teaching leader. More so. So I spoke to a principal, Bo Griffin, who fits into the learning advocate to a T. And you could hear it in his voice when he was talking about his school, how, I really push my students to learn this, or maybe they won't fit into this mode, so I have them learn this instead. And I'm for the growth model because I want to see the students learn over time. And even if they're not particularly in like on a 10th grade level, they started at a 4th grade level and they made it all the way to a 9th grade level. You know what? That's improvement. And that's what I want to see. And it was really cool talking to him because he fits into that archetype so well.
Well, and what's cool is you don't necessarily have to be one or the other. I mean, I was absolutely the believer. That was where I fit in, even though, here I wound up with a ton of graduate degrees that certainly helped me to be a method master, of course, of many, many different types of methodologies. But I just know that what prevailed for me was the believer, but it doesn't mean these other archetypes aren't alive and well in me. And so it isn't exclusive, but I think what's also nice is to know that as we work together as professionals and as adults is that, Anthony, you might be absolutely great at being the synergizer on our team. You might be just great at creating those synergistic forces that get people to work together. And you're just maybe better at that than anybody I've ever known. And thank goodness you and I are colleagues and friends, because as I work in my role as the believer, you help me to plug into others, and I give you the belief to help make that happen. So, that's what you need you ultimately need each other, and you need people to play different roles, and you need to recognize that people can be, we're not monoliths, and we're not just playing one role. We can certainly operationalize a number of these, especially sometimes it's different in the situation too.
100%. So broadly speaking, what are the opportunities for a teacher or someone new in the role to improve their leadership skills in education, and how can a teacher develop into a leader over time?
Well, one of the most important things they can do is to abandon many of the old sensibilities about leadership that most teachers cling to. So over the years, I've chaired about 70 different dissertations, and many times when I have teachers come to me and they say, I want to get a doctorate degree, and I want to advocate, I want to be part of change. And they say that, I can't wait to become a principal so that I can actually lead change. I can lead innovation. That's a terribly crippling perspective, because it assumes that really until you become an administrator, you really can't lead any significant change. And frankly, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, I would argue that the deepest and most sustaining change is coming right from the classroom. And it's true in any, I have to look around today in almost any example of the economy, that innovation comes at the point of contact between, the innovation and the stuff around which is being innovated. I mean, so, the best innovations in education are coming from the teachers themselves. So to be waiting to become an administrator is a mistake. And a lot of that comes from the old traditional factory model of in organizations that, frankly, that's what our schools were based on. So to answer your question directly, the way we get teachers to begin to become better teacher leaders is, first and foremost, abandon your old notion of bureaucracy and hierarchy. Of course, your schools have a bureaucracy. Of course, it has a hierarchy. But ultimately, you have so much more control than you ever imagined of your job. Of course, today there's, many of my teachers, when I say that kind of thing to an audience, I have teachers say, you don't understand. I'm being controlled so much more than ever. But yet, in comparison to so many other jobs, teachers, generally speaking, have more control over what they do in their day and in their week and in their month and in their year than many other professions. And so you have that. So for the first thing to evolve as a leader is to blow up some of those old notions. You really do have an awful lot of control. And secondly is to kind of remember, when you talk about being a teacher leader, really, what are you talking about? I hope that they're talking about seeing leadership, two things. I hope they see leadership as an organic force that's available in the organization. In other words, part of that old paradigm is that leadership is closely associated with a position. Now, I've had some jobs in my career where I've had great positional authority, and that made me a quote-unquote leader. I've also been in institutions where I've had some institutional power that was granted to me, but I've had a lot more power because of my ability to stimulate innovation and to get others to move because of my ability to connect with them or my energy or whatever else it might be. if leadership is seen as an organic force that's available in the organization, then it changes your leadership trajectory. So even now, when I want to be a leader, if I want to be a leader in the industry, in education, in leadership, and in innovation, if I want to be a leader in that space, I have to declare myself. I have to be able to present. I have to be able to deliver. I have to be able to stimulate others around me to show up and to deliver. That speaks more again to the leadership as an organic force that's being created. And the second piece is it's I believe that leadership revolves around innovation. And teachers that are really successful see it that way because, look, you can become a department chair and you can cross I's, dot T's, make sure that budgets, items are aligned and that Excel spreadsheets, match up appropriately. All of that would be an example of more of management. But truly, leadership is about innovation. So if as a teacher leader, you really want to get there, you blow up those old paradigms, you realize that leadership is an organic force, and then you keep yourself focused on innovation. What innovations, are being stimulated around me? Am I part of being able to create a context of innovation that's shaping some changes in my school? If those things are happening, then truly your role as a teacher leader is evolving. So again, waiting for that positional authority or waiting for the right to lead, you'll be waiting an awfully long time. Seizing the moment, recognizing it as an organic force and igniting innovation. That's really what teacher leadership is all about.
So in igniting innovation, one of the common themes that you touched upon was harnessing your own emotions. So you had another book where you wrote called Leading a Learning Organization, where you explore how we can use and manage our emotions to hone our leadership practice and incite more productivity in teaching roles. Yep. So how does this work? Like, how do you harness your own emotions to hone leadership practice? And hone our
Well, it's a great question. And I've been revisiting that so much more recently, and I'm going to be so much more of that in the future because I'm more convinced than ever on two fronts. One, if you just look at the research and at what happens, at what drives human performance. At the base, even if we weren't talking about education, if we're talking about preparing a great baseball player, if you're talking about preparing, and I've worked with engineers in major software companies and companies that do all kinds of different work, innovators. The way that you stimulate, the only way that you can stimulate human performance is to engage in deep learning. And the way learning is stimulated is through the eruption of and shaping of the emotional context. If I were being incredibly boring on this call, and droning on and on in a slow tone, it would be hard for you to conjure up the emotional intention that would allow you to think about anything that I was writing about or talking about. If you're engaged with somebody and you're being a good, conversationalist, your emotions change. You get more interested. You get more excited. I mean, one of the things I talked about when I was a high school principal, we used to give locker combinations to young men, happened to be young men and women, but in this example, young men. And they would get locker combinations and they would forget it right away. And we have to give it to them again. A young lady would give a young man his phone number as an example, and he would remember that phone number on the first call and never forget it, and maybe remember it 20 years later. Why? Because he brought a different level of emotional intentionality to what they do. So what I'm saying is that the emotional state that you bring to your learning and to your profession and to the moment changes how you work. So how do teachers get there? Well, first of all, you got to think about what kinds of emotional states are most inviting to you in terms of your own human performance. I happen to think things like pride, like gratitude, like feelings of courageousness. Those are emotional states that really drive me. And so what we've learned about emotion is the way you can get there is only two things you can do. It's the words that you use and the actions that you take. Generally speaking, the only two things that can change your state are the words you use and the actions you take. So I can talk to you about all this, but if you begin to use different words consistently and take different actions consistently, then you're suddenly going to find yourself in a different emotional state more often. So that's how teachers can do it. So like, to get really practical, I've got teachers that said, you know what? I get what you're saying, Casey. And I think that the emotions of pride and acceptance are two states that we just need more of in my classroom and I need in my life. So I'm going to make sure that whether I say words you use and actions that you take, I'm going to make sure that I'm embedding words and actions and phraseology and into the conversation what I need to do to make those emotions show up. And then I'm going to take action. I'm going to have my students take action. I'm going to take action, but we're going to take action that, for example, that would demonstrate that we are prideful, that we are courageous. And truly, you know this, if I wasn't feeling, I happen to feel good today, but if I wasn't feeling good today, or I was feeling down, if I begin to use words that don't associate with somebody being down, if I begin to take some action, like getting some exercise, moving, saying hello to people, greeting a friend, those actions and those words then begin to change my emotional state, and then I can change how I perform. But in closer to this part of it, to respond to your question, it is so important. We know that one thing about the research is really clear. One of the most compelling and certain findings about brain research that we know is that it is the linchpin for all learning. So for us as educators, as a profession, for us to really prevail and be successful, we have to be thinking about what are the emotional states that our kids are in when they learn, because there is positively nothing more important. It's more important than diet. It's more important than anything you bring to a learning opportunity is the emotional intentionality, because that emotional intentionality will drive the stimulation of brain cells, which will drive the degree to which learning is captured, stored, and then ultimately used again.
So your research brings some specific information into the long explored but broadly touched on field of teacher leadership. And wanted to know what about the current condition in education has brought about the new urgency for understanding the proper practices of teacher leadership. I know that the argument now is the switch to private education because public schools are falling apart, and there's always the push in the upper levels of academia for new and better practices. So what is it about the current condition that is pushing everyone to really focusing on teacher leadership?
Well, I hope you're right, actually. I don't know that I actually would necessarily share the observation that they're focusing on teacher leadership. I wish they would, because in many cases, what I'm observing is that the drive towards standardized testing, which I happen to believe in accountability. I think there needs to be accountability, and I don't think inherently that's a mistake. But if you think about it, what most states of accountability are doing are asking systems to drive every kid towards what's average. Now, I happen to have a couple of kids that are pretty bright kids, my sons. And if the school that they attend and said, we're going to do you a favor, we're going to get your sons to perform at average for your state, and we want you to congratulate us when we get there, I'm not going to be thrilled, because I have sons that certainly can, get to average, and I hope well beyond average because of the support they've had along the way. So the idea that we're pursuing average is part of the discussion of today. So when there's a discussion, when people say that, that our schools are generally failing, I would observe that in many cases, perhaps they're right, but I also want to point out what metrics are we using to measure that, because by many metrics, we continue to improve. I think what has really come along that's different is we have heightened expectations. We have expectations, for example, today of a very personalized learning experience. Our schools were never designed to be personalized. We're expecting, we've always sort of said this, but our schools were designed to sort kids out. Our schools were designed for an economy when lots of kids didn't need to go on beyond maybe 8th grade. And our systems were designed to literally sort kids out so their learning would begin to trickle off after 8th grade. And the major overarching systems that drive that have never changed. So those, we're being asked to do things we've never done before. Arguably, we're doing it better than before, but because I think the demands are changing, we're being made to look like we're not terribly responsive. But I do think that the good news is that the weight of innovation as it presses in from all over is going to continue just to simply drive the arc of change, like it or not, when people are out there. I was on the phone today with just a huge contractor from the Middle East where I'm helping them to rethink a bunch of their blended learning opportunities for their entire country. And they're absolutely, we are absolutely coming up with some really creative and innovative ways of delivering curriculum that even if people didn't want to change, that they'll find themselves having to change, because the technology, the innovation environment is going to create an almost moment of non-negotiable change and innovation that I think will be cool. But and in the face of that, to kind of get back to your question as I close up the statement, is that's going to actually make more room for teacher leadership, because in the future, teachers are not going to be, and they're not now, but they're not going to be bound to the limitations of the relationships in their school district. I've done some really great, interesting work with the National Education Association, and we put together a large international network of teachers and allow them to find each other digitally. And when you find each other digitally, you can find out that there are teachers connecting with one another from the Everglades up to, Seattle, Washington, and they are literally growing and innovating together. And to me, that's where the future will be, when there will be, schools without walls, and there are teachers without boundaries who find each other and push each other in innovations in unique ways. And when they work that way, I really think that's when some of these ideas about teacher leadership will really take on new and innovative and geometric forms.
I see. So the way I've been looking at education is that, well, I think most people look at education as like, oh, it's not where we want it to be, and it's failing. But I think the tide of education is moving towards improvement, and I think that this is a giant leap forward, or it opens the possibility for a giant leap forward if we improve our teacher leadership. So last question, and then I'll let you go. So I open a university with an unlimited budget. All right, I have tier 1 professors beating on the door. What advice would you give me, as an administrator, in trying to change the culture and develop a core faculty of leaders for my university?
If I were starting again, well, I think I would abandon an awful lot of what we traditionally do, particularly at universities. I think universities, and I've made a career there, so I'm talking about my own family, but generally speaking, they're not built for innovation, and many of their systems are built for rather slow self-examination and very little in terms of mostly focus on, trying to, at best, at least reveal some new information about what's happening. But, generally speaking, they're very slow and inflexible structures. So I would hope that, if you and I were starting a new one, I would want it to be flexible. I want it to be outcomes driven. I want it to be innovation driven, one that we're really focused on trying to identify innovations and really experiment with them quite robustly, because it's the more connected that universities can be right to the work of schools, the better, the better both the university and better the insights of the those who take class, who learn and would absorb that learning opportunity. So I don't know if I went where you want me to go. If you wanted something like a different kind of angle, but that's, I guess, how I would respond to especially the university side.
No, totally. So if we were to start a high school, would you give different advice? Would you say that we should also have a more flexible, outcome driven structure?
Yeah, if we were starting a high school, depending on exactly how we wanted to do it, I think that in an ideal world, it would be we would have a more flexible schedule where the curriculum were certainly flexible, so that we could give every kid a personalized learning experience where we could identify a kid's potential, a student's potential, and we could build, it would be really smart to start learning process like this, where if I would send my sons to a school, that their first question is, what do you currently know, and what are you ready to learn? Because ultimately, that's the auspices, that's the launching pad for learning. If you were my teacher and you came to me, Anthony, and said, this is what Casey knows, and this is what we know he's on the verge of being ready to learn based on his skills, his abilities, his competence, I can grow so much more quickly rather than always filling in the gaps of either being ahead or behind, but to create a personalized environment that asks those questions. What does the learner know, and what are they ready to learn? If you start there, you ultimately can go so much further.
So, all right. So where can people find your work, in particular your latest book?
My latest book is on digital learning. It's about the anywhere, anytime classroom, which really speaks to, frankly, the kind of school I was just talking about, that can take place, that can be anywhere, that can be available. And that particular book is available on Amazon.com at my author page at Casey Reason, and it's also available with Solution Tree, my publisher. And my website is CaseyReason.com.
All right, perfect. So you can find all of them on CaseyReasons.com, and then from there you can cross-check it with Amazon, and you can purchase them there. All right, that's the podcast for today. This is your host, Anthony Lindsay. You can find the show on polysite.org, and you can also subscribe on iTunes. Later.